Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. I'm Cassidy. If you're new here, welcome. It's really nice to meet you. And if you are returning, welcome back. It's nice to see you again. So today we're going to be talking about Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. It is book 1 in the Infernal Devices trilogy. It is in the same world as her other series, Mortal Instruments. It is actually the prequel to it. It takes place in like 1898, I believe, in London. You do not by any means have to watch the videos I made on City of Bones, Ashes, and Glass before you watch this video, but there are probably going to be a couple things that make more sense if you have already seen those videos or at least read those books. As always, this is going to be a video where I do an entire summary of the book and my thoughts while reading it, so if you would like to know the story and read it without any spoilers, if you haven't read it already, please click off the video. Click back on once you've read it. I'd love to hear what you thought. And then just so you guys do know, I have actually already read this trilogy as well. However, unlike the first 3 books in the Mortal Instruments series, I don't remember a ton of things that happen in this trilogy, and I was definitely surprised reading it. There are definitely things that I remember and things that I know, but not a lot of the big twists do I remember, which is kind of surprising. I maybe read it too fast the first time around. If anybody is interested, this is the bookmark I was using while reading it. It is Luffy from One Piece. And if you see me look down or off to the side, I'm just simply referring back to my notes in my fun, spooky little notebook, so I don't miss telling you guys anything I want you to know. Alright, let's get into it. Clockwork Angel, Book 1 in the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare. At the very top it says, magic is dangerous, but love is more dangerous still. When Tessa Gray crosses the ocean to find her brother in Victorian England, something terrifying is waiting for her in London's downworld. Kidnapped by the mysterious Dark Sisters, who are members of a secret organization called the Pandemonium Club, Tessa soon learns that she has the power to transform into another person. The Magister, a shadowy figure who runs the club, will stop at nothing to claim Tessa's power for his own. Friendless and hunted, Tessa takes refuge with the Shadow Hunters, warriors dedicated to ridding the world of demons. She soon finds herself fascinated by and torn between 2 best friends, James and Will. As Tessa is drawn deep into a plot that threatens to destroy the Shadow Hunters, she realizes that she may need to choose between saving her brother and helping her new friends to save the world, and that love may be the most dangerous magic of all. So my first impressions from the back and my first thought is Pandemonium Club. That was the club that Clary and Simon entered at the very beginning of the original trilogy, City of Bones, before they even knew anything about Shadowhunters. So is it the same club? Also, does Tessa's brother have powers as well? She has to decide whether to save him or save the Shadowhunters. Is he powerless or does he have powers? And then also, how can someone claim another person's powers? That's not normally a thing, or at least it's not in the original series. You can use another powers if you use them. Like, they're the ones who use the powers, though. You're just using the person. So is it like that? Or is it like he wants to somehow take the powers and be able to use them for himself? We start off with the prologue, and that is William. He unalives a demon, while Jem finds a girl not alive in the alley, and she has a stab wound through her chest. Also, Tessa disembarks from a ship from America, and she arrives in London. She's looking for her big brother, Nate. He sent the ticket and a letter telling her to come to London. But instead of her brother, she finds Mrs. Dark and Mrs. Black, also known as the Dark Sisters, with a note from Nate telling Tessa to go with them, and they will meet up, basically. So Tessa goes. Also important to note, she wears a little Clockwork Angel necklace, like, I'm guessing probably not much bigger than the size of my little ghost, if you guys can see that. But she wears a little Clockwork Angel necklace, and it belongs to her mom, who is no longer alive. But she wears it around her neck, and whenever she's feeling unsure, she touches the necklace, and it gives her reassurance. Also important to note that Tessa has no other family besides her brother. Her parents died when she was younger, and her Aunt Harriet recently passed away, which is why she traveled across the world, basically, from America to London on a ship to meet her brother. Now we're into the actual story. 6 weeks have passed since Tessa's landed in London, and she is being held prisoner by the Dark Sisters, who are beating her and hurting her until she changes. And she didn't know what that was at first. She didn't know about this power or that she possessed anything like that. But they taught her how to change and taught her how to use her power. She needs to hold an object of that belongs to the person that she wants to change into. She changes into them, and not only does she wear their appearance, but she can actually kind of turn into the person. She has their memories, and she can touch their mind. She also learns that they wish to introduce her to the Magister, and not only just introduce, but she is set to marry the Magister. And not wanting to do that, Tessa decides after 6 weeks of staying there because of her brother and not trying to escape because of him, they threatened him basically, saying that if Tessa does anything that they'll hurt her brother. She decides she can't marry him, so she runs away. She whacks the maid. Her name is Miranda. She whacks her upside the head with, I think, a lamp or something, and the head just kind of caves in, folds in. Wild. But she runs away. She runs through the house and makes it outside. But when she asks someone for help, she recognizes him as the coachman of the Dark Sisters, and so he's obviously not on Tessa's side, so she's back to being locked up. The Dark Sisters are so angry that she tried to run away, and they're calling her ungrateful because they taught her how to use this power. The Magister is this all-powerful being, and she is ungrateful, so they tie her up to the bed. But she realizes the sisters not only taught her how to turn into someone when she's holding an object that they own, but she can remember that change and change into them again even without holding the object. So she changes into a smaller girl. Tessa's probably about 16, 17. And I think this girl was probably 8 to 12, so she changes into her. And because she's so much smaller, the ropes that were around her wrists and ankles, they can't hold her anymore, and she's free. But the door is locked and she can't get out, so she's trying to figure out what to do next, if she should just wait for Miranda to come in, or what's going on. That is when Will comes in. And Will was the shadow hunter from the prologue, and he comes in, he's like, hello, and she's like, what are you doing here? Who are you? Do you work for the Dark Sisters? He's like, no. He followed the trail of the girl that wasn't alive in the alley for those 6 weeks and traced her to the Dark Sisters. And so he came in to check things out, finds Tessa, and so they decide to run. He's able to open the door again with a rune, with his steel. And so they run through the house, but the Dark Sisters manage to catch up. And when it looks like it's going to be a showdown between basically one shadow hunter and one girl who doesn't know how to use her powers of changing and can't fight at all, versus 2 warlocks, backup comes and they're able to escape. Will kills one of the sisters, Mrs. Black. So Mrs. Dark is infuriated because her sister just died because of a shadow hunter. And so she uses her powers to make lightning. The lightning hits Tessa in the shoulder. She passes out. She wakes up and she's in the Institute in London, and Brother Enoch is there looking over her, and Tessa is terrified. So for those of you who might not know, the Institute is basically just where they hold shadow hunters. They have the capability of holding many, many shadow hunters, but the London Institute is also home for several shadow hunters. And she learns that all the shadow hunters there, all the shadow hunter children who are there, are orphans. And then Brother Enoch, he is one of the silent brothers of the clave, and Tessa is terrified because all the brothers have mutilated themselves. So they have no eyes, their mouths are sewn shut. And Tessa is just what monster, basically. And also, they can speak into your mind. So thankfully, Brother Enoch is not the only one there. Charlotte is also there. She runs the London Institute. Also important to note that Charlotte is super young. She's only 23 years old. Younger than me, and she's in charge of a whole institute. But Shadowhunters grow up extremely quickly, and so her being in charge of the London Institute, while it's very young, even by Shadowhunter standards, it's not completely like ridiculous to know of or hear of. So Charlotte and Brother Enoch are talking to Tessa, and they tell her that she is a downworlder, so vampires, fairies, werewolves, warlocks. She's most likely a warlock, however, she does not have a warlock mark. Mrs. Black, yes? Yes, Mrs. Black, she was the one who was unalive. She had like talons for hands. Magnus Bane from the original series, he has yellow cat eyes. But Tessa doesn't have anything like a warlock's mark, and she should definitely have it by this time. They usually get it when they're pretty young, like I think 12 is the oldest they tend to get it. So they're not entirely sure if she is a warlock or not. She most likely is, but she's definitely a shape changer. Tessa's very confused. She doesn't know anything about this world, has never even known that it exists, but now she's thrown into it, and not only thrown into it, she's part of it, like a big part of this world. So... But Charlotte's so sweet. She's like, come down to dinner. I'll have like one of the servants come in and help dress you. Again, it is 1898 London, so servants are very common. But the servants for the Shadowhunters are a little unique. They all have to have the sight, so they can see this kind of world and they understand what's going on. So the servant Sophie comes in. Sophie has a giant scar across her cheek, I believe, and it's awful scar, looks bad. Tessa reacts really poorly to the scar at first, which she can tell hurts Sophie. She didn't mean to react like that. It was just kind of like gut reaction. She's also very tense and high-strung right now from everything that has happened. She was also held prisoner for 6 weeks. She was thrown into a world she doesn't know, but she feels really bad for making Sophie feel hurt from her reaction. But she goes down to dinner. The girl Jessamine, she is one of the kids there. She is being super rude, doesn't believe that Tessa can do anything, and is lying. So Tessa's like, all right, give me something of yours. I'll prove it to you. She changes into Jessamine. When she changes back, she's bombarded with questions like, what are you? How can you do this? Blah, blah. Like, she doesn't know any of these answers. She's trying to figure out these answers herself, but she's bombarded with questions. So I'm going to go through all the people who live in the London Institute, servants and Shadowhunters alike, and if we know any others with their family name in the original series. So the servants, we don't know their family names because they're not Shadowhunters, but they're also important to know who they are. There's Agatha, she's the cook. Sophie, who's the servant that we just went over. And Thomas, he is also a servant. He's normally like the coachman, but he was also trained like a Shadowhunter since he was a kid, and since he's been in the Institute, he's been trained just like Shadowhunters. He just happens to not be one. And then for the Shadowhunters, the heads of the Institute are Charlotte and Henry Branwell. They are married. Henry is more of a scatterbrained inventor, and Charlotte is the actual head, which is also super uncommon because, again, it is 1898. Women had hardly any rights, if any at all, but being Shadowhunters, you actually have more rights as a woman than just being a regular mundane. So she is the actual head of the London Institute, which everybody knows. We do not know any other Branwells in the series, at least not yet. There may be more coming forward. I have no idea. There is Jessamine Lovelace. Jessamine was that girl who was very rude. We do not know any other Lovelaces. And then for the boys, there is James Carstairs, also known as Jem. And he is a gem, let's be real here. But Jem Carstairs, and we don't know any Carstairs yet, but I'm pretty sure Carstairs is the main character in one of the other trilogies by Cassandra Clare. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I believe that's right. And then Will is William Herondale. And we, of course, know Herondale because Jace was just revealed to be a Herondale. So I can see kind of the similarities in them just by, like, I guess being a Herondale. But they're both adorable. We love them. So yeah, it's just really cool to see Jace's ancestor, whether that's his, like, great-great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-uncle or whatever, or cousin or something, whether they're like directly like a linear line related or it's like way off and on a different branch. It's just cool to see another Herondale. Anywho, back to the story. So Will gives Tessa a tour around the Institute where she meets all the servants. So first she meets Agatha, the cook. She compliments Agatha and Will is like, good job complimenting her. Now she'll like you. If she doesn't like you, she'll put stones in your porridge. And she's like, ah. And then they meet Thomas. He is the one who has been trained like a shadow hunter since he came to the Institute, but he's not a shadow hunter. He's just strong and he helps out. Will thinks he also likes Sophie being the servant girl with the giant scar across her face, and it's super cute. He says that he thinks Thomas likes Sophie because he always helps her out and doesn't want her to do too much or overwork herself. It's cute. They end up going to the library and they have a little moment. They call each other by their first names because, again, this is 1898 London. It's it's Miss Grey, Mr. Herondale. It's like calling each other by their family names instead of their first names. But the shadow hunters are super informal, so they start to call each other by their first names, and they just have a little moment. Will also gives Tessa the Shadow Hunters Codex, just the book basically explaining the Shadow Hunters, Downworlders, everything, because he's like, you probably want to know a little bit about this. Unfortunately, their little moment about books and heroes and heroines that dies once Sophie comes in. Her and Will argue, which shocks Tessa because Sophie's a servant and servants aren't supposed to argue, but again, super informal. But it's very obvious that Sophie hates Will. And when Tessa comments on it and is like, she hates you, and he's like, yeah, Tessa's like, why does she hate you? What did you do to her? It looks like she hates you for a reason. And she also mentions the fact that everyone there is an orphan. Will gets really upset with Tessa, says she doesn't know what she's talking about, and he never said he was an orphan. So he leaves. Tessa has to find her way back to her room by herself. She starts reading the Shadowhunters Codex, falls asleep reading it actually. When she wakes up, because there is very pretty music from a violin playing. So she follows the music, and that's where we meet Jem. So she interrupts him while playing, but he's not annoyed at all. Tessa has a billion questions, and Jem listens and answers every single one. You can tell he's a very patient individual. We learn that he is actually from Shanghai. He's half Chinese and half Britain. He's half Chinese, half British, excuse me. And when his parents were killed by a demon, he moved to Britain because of his British heritage. Will ends up coming into Jem's room. He claims he's super drunk, has amazing stories, and however, as soon as Jem starts having a coughing fit, and not just any other coughing fit, he starts coughing up blood, Will sobers up immediately and is like, where's your medicine? Tell me where it is. Jem tells him, and while getting the medicine, Will ushers Tessa out of the room. It's like, you tell no one about what happened. You can't tell anybody. She's like, I won't. She also didn't smell any alcohol on him, and her brother was a drunk. So she knows that you can't just sober up like that, or at least Nate never did. Like, it's impossible, even in bad situations, when you're as drunk as Will claimed to be, you can't just sober up like that. It's the next day, and Tessa and Jessamine are going to go buy Tessa some clothes because Jessamine is way smaller than Tessa. So her clothes obviously don't fit. You can't really let out clothes. You can take them in, but she needs new clothes. And while they're doing that, Henry and Charlotte are going to visit Mr. Mortmain, who was Nate's employer. And when they enter the building, Mr. Mortmain knows about shadow hunters. We now go to Will and Jem. They are searching the house that Tessa was held prisoner in, where they find Miranda. She's the maid. And she's like a robot, basically. She's basically a very human-like robot. And she has a message for the Nephilim. and that is that they need to be careful or they'll be slain. So they obviously bring Miranda back to the Institute. So back to Tessa and Jessamine. They're walking around while shopping. And Tessa learns that Jessamine never wanted to be a shadow hunter. Her parents had left the life. The only reason she lives at the Institute is because her parents died. She's an orphan and she had no other family. And the shadow hunters are required by law to take in young shadow hunters, at least until they turn 18. But she doesn't want to be a shadow hunter. Her parents left her a ton of money, so as soon as she turns 18, she plans to leave the Institute and live on her own. She asks Tessa to live with her because a lady living on her own is improper, but two sisters or cousins living together is perfectly acceptable. And it's not like Tessa will have anywhere to go once all this is solved, because she is a downworlder. Tessa doesn't answer, doesn't say anything in the affirmative or negative about living with her, because they end up walking down an alley and a goblin attacks them, where Jessamine actually unalives the goblin with her parasol that Henry had given her, a parasol with like daggers in it or like knives or something, and she like whacks the goblin into submission. Oh my god, it's great. Henry had gifted it to her. She thought it was super cool and was disappointed when she found out it was actually a weapon. But it's pretty useful, so, you know. And she carries it around all the time as well. Once back at the Institute, Jessamine also shows Tessa a like mini version of the house she grew up in. And there's like mini her, mini mom, mini dad. And she's basically like still playing with dolls. Like dad comes home from work and is in the study, mom's in the kitchen, baby Jessie's upstairs in her like crib. And it's such a stark contrast to everything in this world with the kids. Because, I mean, she's 17 years old, and while it might still be very childish to play with dolls in a dollhouse, it's not totally outside the realm of possibility, I feel like. But shadow hunters have to grow up so quickly that Jem and Will, who are both 17, feel like they're like in their 20s at least because of how quickly they have to grow up, because there's no other option. And even in the original series as well, Jace, Alec, Isabel, they all feel so much older than 16, 17, 18 because of how they have had to grow up. So Jessamine acting like a child is so interesting and so different that it makes her acting like maybe a 15-year-old, still younger than what she is, but like I'm like, is she 8? Like, it's crazy. Charlotte and Henry talk to Mr. Mortmain, who, fully aware of the downworld and shadow hunters and everything like that, he tells them about the Pandemonium Club, which is basically just a club where humans can go and they can be treated to the sight of vampires and warlocks and all of that. He introduced Nate to the club. Nate knew right away. He's like, introduce me to the Pandemonium Club. So Mr. Mortmain did. Also important to note that Tessa and Nate's parents used to work for Mr. Mortmain, while Mr. Mortmain states that the parents were never interested in the Pandemonium Club. The son was. Anyway, once he starts going to the club, he leaves Mr. Mortmain's employment and starts to work for De Quincey, who he reveals to be the Magister. De Quincey is the head vampire of the London, like, vampire clan, and he is an ally of the Clave. He's always been an ally. So finding out that he is the Magister and that he is the cause of so much strife and heartache and grief is a shock, and it's not good for the Clave that an ally of theirs is doing such horrible things. Once everyone is back at the Institute, Sophie goes to grab Tessa, says that Henry and Charlotte would like to see her. And so she leads them down to Henry's lab, basically. I forget if they actually call it a lab in the book, but it's where he makes all of his inventions. So lead him down to the lab. While walking, it's pretty obvious that Sophie is very fond of Charlotte and Henry, and she's very fond of Jem, but she is not fond of Will and Jessamine, which with what we know of all of them so far, I feel like it's pretty fair. Henry and Charlotte show Tessa Miranda. She is like basically cut open, but she is an automation, so there's no blood, there's no organs. But inside of her, there is De Quincey's signature. They reveal to her that De Quincey, the vampire, is the Magister, and that they talked to Mr. Mortmain, who is Nate's employer, and now De Quincey is Nate's current employer. Now everyone's at dinner, and Henry asks to see Tessa's little Clockwork Angel, that her necklace, the one that was her mom's, that's like a little talisman for her. He asks to see it, so she hands it over. He's going to like just see if it works, see what's going on the inside. And Tessa already feels naked without it. And also while at dinner, Camille Belcourt comes. She is a vampire, and she comes with info about De Quincey. But for the information, she wants to see Tessa and see her change. So she goes down. Will and Jem also go down. Charlotte's there. She changes. So Camille gives information that De Quincey has always hated Shadowhunters, and he's always hated the Accords. The pact, basically, that Downworlders won't hurt Mundanes, and then Shadowhunters won't hunt Downworlders. He's hated it from the beginning, and only is playing along for survival. But he regularly brings regular Mundanes in, drinks their blood, and unalives them all. So Camille actually has a plan to help take De Quincey down, and that is for Tessa to go into a party that De Quincey hosts as Camille, and Will go with her. He'll be like her human subjugate, or something like that, where he's basically infatuated with Camille, and it's basically Camille's little pet is what that is. Lots of vampires have them. Of humans, they're a constant supply of blood. They're a constant supply of blood, and as long as you don't drink too much, humans can replenish their blood, so it's not horrible. But by doing that process, the humans are infatuated with their vampires. So Will go undercover as one of these subjugates, and Tessa will go undercover as Camille. When Camille is leaving, Jem and Will follow her, and they're like, we need to know why you want De Quincey, like, gone. She's like, I don't have to tell you. He's like, and they're like, we won't do anything unless you tell us. And again, the boys are 17. They don't really have this power, but Camille still tells them. Camille had actually had a werewolf lover. And werewolves and vampires just have always hated each other, and they're two clans at war, basically. But she had a she had a werewolf lover that De Quincey unalived. De Quincey basically punished Camille for daring to go outside of their own race. Not just outside of their own race, because that is actually more common than one would think, but to a werewolf. So he unalives the werewolf, and Camille wants revenge, which is so fair in my opinion. Camille also reveals that Magnus is going to be at the party, Magnus Bane, and he is going to be there to help Tessa because he is Camille's lover. Ah! So excited he's in these books. We love Magnus. It'll be interesting to see the Magnus of 150 years prior. So I'm excited. That night, while Tessa's talking to Charlotte, she comes to the realization that although she wants everything that's happening right now to be a dream and her before life to be the reality, the reverse is actually true. Who she was in America and her life there was the dream and the untrue, and what is happening now is the reality. It is true. Over the next week or so, or a couple days before the party, Tessa keeps changing into Camille, trying to walk like her, talk like her. She has Jem and Will's help, but she keeps failing. She can't come across as confident as a vampire, as old as Camille is supposed to. Also, Camille's mind isn't talking to Tessa. When Tessa changes into someone, she can hear their thoughts, like what they would do in certain situations, and Camille's voice isn't talking to Tessa right now. The Enclave come to the Institute to meet. In London, it's called Enclave. in America, it's called conclave. But basically, the clave meets, they need to discuss this plan all together. We also note that Lightwoods are there and Penhallows are there. So 2 names that we know, Lightwoods obviously being Alec, Isabel, and Maris, Robert. They are the Lightwoods in the original series. And the Penhallows, we just met Aline Penhallow in City of Glass. She is the cousin of the real Sebastian, but it's very fun that we get to recognize some names. Gabriel Lightwood, who is the Lightwood child, he is 18, so he's actually allowed to take part in these meetings. He hates Will, makes it very known that he hates Will, like despises him. Will also hates Gabriel, so you know, it's fair. At least the feeling is mutual. Tessa, Will, and Jem are all kicked out because they're all too young to take part in the meeting, so they go upstairs where they make a room so they can overhear what's happening. Basically just the clave is arguing, no one can get along, no one can agree with anyone. Charlotte's power is called into question, and the fact that she's running this institute is called into question. Eventually, though, everyone votes for the plan. When Tessa's like, wait, they were just arguing. Will and Jem are like, they like to argue and they like to show that they're all tough and in charge, but there's no way anyone would vote against this because they don't want to appear weak. So they all agree to the plan to have Will be the shadow hunter to go undercover with Tessa. So Will and Tessa ask Camille, they go to De Quincy's, have a little moment in the carriage. Moments are so small and so sweet, but again, very small. Tessa is actually wondering if the moment and like him look, if she's reading into it or if he was just looking at Camille, because right now she's wearing like a Camille body. And so was he actually seeing her or was he seeing Camille? Then they go inside. De Quincy is there and he's like, I'd love to taste your human, and like goes to bite Will. And Tessa, as Camille obviously, stops him and is like, no, he's mine and you drink way too much. Finally, Camille's voice is talking to Tessa, so she kind of knows what to do and what to say. Thank God. Whew. And now Magnus comes! Yay! They leave, they go talk in private in like De Quincy's like study or something. They also find blueprints of the automations there. But Magnus basically just reveals that he only goes to these parties for Camille. He knows it's hard for Camille to still be under De Quincy's rule after he killed her werewolf lover, so he just goes for her to help protect her and help be her support. And Magnus is always, he's such a good lover and he's such a good partner. And well, it's so, your girl loves Alec and Magnus, like my favorite couple in the entire series and everything. They are my favorite couple. So it's weird, it's like weird that Magnus has a different lover right now, but obviously Alec isn't even like a thought because his parents don't exist yet. But yeah, it's nice to see that Magnus has basically not changed how he is as a lover. Whether there are other changes to come forward, I'm not sure yet, but we love Magnus. Then all the vampires are seated and De Quincy's talking, basically like, F the Accords, F shadow hunters, we hate them kind of thing. And Tessa being real dumb, she's like whispering to Will, why doesn't he ignite the device? Henry had given them a device that shines super brightly, and once that device goes off, then all the rest of the shadow hunters are going to come in, and then it's basically just going to be a bloodbath. But she's like whispering to Will, but they're in a room full of vampires. Like, girl, they have such good hearing. What are you doing? Thankfully, it seems like everyone's too focused on De Quincy and what he's saying. Will tells Tessa to leave, that it's about to get dangerous and she can't stay. So Magnus tries to get Tessa out of there. When De Quincy brings out a human saying this human betrayed us, he will be the next to die, and take off the like cloak mask thing he was wearing. And it's revealed that this human that is set to die is Nate. So once Nate is revealed to be the prisoner, Tessa, still real dumb, yells at Will to set off the device. So now everybody knows because she's screaming. And Will sets it off. Unfortunately, the device malfunctions. Something we learn about Henry very quickly is that he loves to invent things, and sometimes they work fabulously. A lot of times they do not. And everyone was worried about this plan, everyone was worried about this plan relying on a device that Henry created. Charlotte loves him and tries to defend him, but even she knows that his devices aren't always so good. So, device malfunctions. Instead of releasing a really bright light, it sets things on fire. Thankfully, vampires are flammable, so still kind of works. A fight ensues, and thankfully the Shadowhunters do come in and they join the fight. Tessa, again as Camille, gets dragged by De Quincey. He doesn't have any inkling that this isn't Camille, so he's yelling at her that she betrayed them, that she's gonna pay, and Tessa goes off on De Quincey for Camille. She's like, you killed my werewolf lover, you deserve this. It was very badass, and we love it. Will comes to help Tessa, and Will and De Quincey fight. Tessa ends up shooting De Quincey, but unfortunately he still escapes. The Shadowhunters rescue Nate, and Tessa is with him all the way to the Institute. He's like sleeping in her lap. She's thankful that they found him, but he's in bad condition. Will and Gabriel argue after the fight's over, and Gabriel, he had mentioned earlier when he was talking to Jem that he is a fine shadow hunter if it weren't for his disability. And when Gabriel's like, Will, I thought we would be friends, something like that. And Will's like, we can't be friends because of how you treat Jem. Like, his disability? Are you kidding me? And then that makes Will think about Jem and how he doesn't know how he's going to live without his best friend. Like, he doesn't know how to live in a world without Jem. Will also ingested vampire blood during the fight with De Quincey. He bit him and got blood in his mouth. Jem's like, why do you always do that? And he's like, because they don't expect it. But because he ingested vampire blood, he needs to take the cure. And he's not too happy about that. And because we find out what the cure is in a minute, and yeah, it's bad. It sucks. So back at the Institute, Nate regains consciousness, but he's like delirious. Brother Enoch is there, and he freaks out, screams. The Magister, De Quincey, had told him that the brothers were evil and they could kill people with their minds. But Nate is poisoned, and he needs Brother Enoch to heal him. It's also revealed, Brother Enoch also reveals to Tessa that Nate is fully human. And part of Tessa is really disappointed by that. She didn't want to be the only one that wasn't fully human. Tessa and Jem have a small little moment about hearts and bravery and courage, and who you are isn't always who your family is. And it's just really cute. Jem's always so sweet, and he's especially sweet to Tessa, and it's precious. Will is treated for the vampire blood, and that is by drinking holy water, like, repeatedly to get it out of your system. Unfortunately, once you have ingested vampire blood, he's like coughing up blood and like puking, and it's gross. Sophie keeps bringing it to him. She's irritable about it, and so Tessa brings Will a pail of holy water in Sophie's place. Once up there, they kind of talk. They end up kissing, which for, again, like 19th century London, oh my goodness, they kiss? And, but after just like, not even like 5-10 seconds probably of kissing, Will shoves Tessa away and yells at her to leave, so she leaves. But she's like, what just happened? Like, she's like, if this were a romance book, because again, she loves to read, she loves romance books. When Sophie is helping her that night, like, get ready for bed, she can tell by the way Tessa is talking about Will that something happened. So she warns Tessa off Will. and says that he can't love anyone. And she said, so Tessa asks, is it bad to love someone who can't love you back? And that's when Sophie's like, no, if the man is worth it, and it's fine to love somebody who doesn't love you back. And the way she's speaking, Tessa knows that she likes somebody. So she's like, do you like Thomas? And she's like, why would I like Thomas? Like, and so Tessa reveals, she's like, I think Thomas likes you. And she's like, no, Thomas doesn't like me. Like, we're friends, we're servants. He doesn't like me. She's like, okay. Like, Tessa doesn't push or anything like that. Tessa then checks in on Nate, and Jessamine is actually in the room. She's watching over him. She's reading to him. She wants Nate to, like, fall in love with her by her being, like, his caretaker when he's sick, and he'll wake up and be like, you took care of me, and, like, again, fall for her so that she can leave the Institute and have Nate by her side. Tessa's like, Jessamine, girl, he has no money. She's like, I have money for both of us. Not with the way Nate gambles. But then after that, she overhears Charlotte, Jem, and Will talk about Nate and talk about the mission that spectacularly failed because DeQuincy got away. And Will suggests that they have the brothers root around in Nate's mind to find out all the information they need, but the problem is that Nate isn't well enough for that, and if the brothers try, it'll destroy his mind. He's like, so who cares? Like, he's being obnoxious. And then he also ends up really hurting Charlotte's feelings. Charlotte had mentioned something about the fact, like, I do love you, Will. Like, something about Charlotte loving Will, and Will states, I wish you would stop loving me. Or I wish you would stop that, or something like along those lines. And you can tell it really hurts Charlotte. Tessa ends up barging in, yells at all of them that they don't care about Mundanes, they don't care about Downworlders. Like, she also hurts Charlotte. She knows she hurt Charlotte and that she's being obtuse, but she leaves, tells them not to follow her, and she can't help but feel a little better. Like, an outburst does kind of make you feel a little better. But Jem ends up following her, and he's like, I hope you didn't mean me. And she's like, nah, you're okay. So they talk, he comforts her, and they end up going on a little walk. They actually speak of Will, and Tessa states that she knows Will is actually a good guy, and while he was the one to suggest the brothers root around Nate's mind, he didn't mean it and wouldn't have let that happen. Jem's like, I'm surprised you knew that. Most people just take him at his word. But Will is genuinely a pretty good guy, and Tessa knows that, but for some reason he wants to play the part of being the bad guy, and she doesn't know why. They also speak of how Will got to the Institute. So his parents were shadow hunters who had left the life. But when you leave, there are certain rules when you leave the shadow hunter life. You can't contact any shadow hunters. You can't, like, call for help or anything like that. You have to, like, and there's another one that I can't really remember, but the important one is any children you have belong to the shadow hunters. And, like, every 6 years, they'll visit and ask if the kid wants to join. Apparently, at 12 years old, Will had left his parents and came to the Institute and said, I'm a shadow hunter. I'm one of yours. You have to take me in. And he was at the Institute. His parents came for him, like, asking for him, wanting to see him, but Will didn't want to see his parents anymore, and Charlotte had to send them away, and he hasn't seen his parents for 5 years. So he just left one day, and no one knows why. Jem's parents, of course, were unalived by a demon back in Shanghai at the Shanghai Institute. Jem also reveals that Will actually doesn't go and get drunk every night like he claims he does. Jem actually followed him one night, and he just walks around London for hours. And then he comes back with an extravagant story about him being wasted and all these girls. And Tessa's like, you don't ask him what he actually does? And Jem's like, no. If he wants to tell me, he'll tell me. He's like, I think Will likes me because I don't ask him questions. And Jem just kind of lets Will do what he needs to do and live his life as he needs to live it. And once Will is ready to tell Jem anything, he will. And It's a really good, like, relationship and pairing for them. And I know I would never be able to just, like, let sleeping dogs lie like that, so I'm very impressed that Jem is able to. Well, on a bridge, automations come, many automations like Miranda, and they actually attack. Jem is able to fight them off. They run back to the Institute, but he's, like, slowing down. Tessa's like, I thought Shadowhunters could run for miles. I don't know what's happening. They get through the Shadowhunter gate, but not inside they get through the gate to the Institute, but not actually inside the Institute, and Jem just collapses. Tessa can't open the doors because she's not a Shadowhunter, so she just bangs on them, hoping someone will come and open them, because the automations are also through the gate. They surround Jem. Everyone comes out and fights. They all attack the automations. The automations claim war for De Quincy and to get Tessa, and then they leave. Jem is taken inside. Will is very concerned about Jem. He's taken inside and to be repaired, like not repaired, to be fixed up and healed. And Jem wants to talk to Tessa. So Will grabs Tessa and Jem reveals what actually happened when his parents died. His mom had unalived, like, this demon's family or something along those lines, so she wanted revenge, and she got into the Institute somehow, or kidnapped them. Something happened, and they were all tied up for days, 2 days. Steven decided to hurt Jem repeatedly and inject him with drugs. They made him hallucinate. They made him delirious. Whenever he kind of regained consciousness, he could hear his parents crying and screaming and begging for him. And then next time he regained consciousness, his dad's voice was no longer there. It was only his mom's voice he could hear. Finally, he was rescued. People were concerned about not hearing from them for 2 days, and he was rescued, but both of his parents were dead, and he was hooked on this drug. So they tried to wean him off it, slowly, cold turkey, different ways, but every time they tried, they found that his body was dependent on it. If he didn't take it, he would die. So he takes a little bit of this drug every day. He takes more right before fighting. But the reason he had collapsed so soon was because he hadn't taken any that day. And he tells Tessa, basically, it's a very quick death without the drug. It's a slower death with the drug, but the more of the drug I take, the faster I will die. So she asks him why he still fights. Like, everyone would be willing, everyone would understand if he didn't, and he's like, yeah, everyone would, but I'm a shadow hunter. This is who I am. And until I take my last breath, I will fight. So he takes more of the drug than he needs to. And he has no qualms about doing that. And overall, it's just really sad. They were looking for a cure. Everyone in the Institute was. But he asked them to stop a couple years ago, that it was useless. There was no cure. And looking was only heartbreaking. And definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So he told them all to stop. And they did. Will did not want Jem to tell Tessa about this and about his big secret because he doesn't want anyone to know Jem's weakness. Not Eve. And Tessa still knew. He doesn't... Well, Will and Tessa have had moments. Well, Jem and Tessa have had moments. He doesn't want Jem to be in danger by anybody. And he doesn't trust anybody. When Tessa leaves the room, Sophie's like, how is Jem? Is he okay? And that's when Tessa realizes that the man Sophie has a crush on, that she loves, that doesn't love her back, is Jem. So it's the middle of the night. Sophie comes to Tessa, wakes her up, is like, Nate's gone. He's missing. They eventually find him in just, like, a different room. And he's terrified of the Shadowhunters. He was told that they're evil, that they're monsters, blah, blah, blah. Tessa's like, we're fine, we're safe. It's a good place. They're not bad people. They're good, I promise. Tessa pulls Will aside and is like, why aren't you looking for a cure for Jem? Despite everything that's going on with her brother, she's still worried about Jem. She's like, why don't you just look for it by yourself and not tell Jem? He's like, so you want me to go against what Jem wishes? and their conversation gets interrupted because Jem comes. Whether he overheard the conversation or not is unsure. But knowing Jem, he would be very understanding of Tessa just kind of going against his wishes right now because she's new and she's like wanting to live. So everyone gathers together in the room so Nate can tell his story. Basically, he had found diary pages that his mother had written about the Pandemonium Club. Nate and Tessa's dad used to work for Mr. Mortmain. He brought the dad to the Pandemonium Club. Dad brought the mom. They went a couple of times, but then they left in like the cover of night. He just like sent a letter like resigning to Mr. Mortmain, not leaving a forwarding address, nothing, and disappeared. So Nate writes Mr. Mortmain and basically threatens him for a job. I'll reveal everything if you don't give me a job. Mr. Mortmain gives him a job and introduces Nate to the Pandemonium Club. He got hooked on the gambling right away. He got hooked on the drinks right away. And he was eventually in massive debt. So DeQuincy gave him an offer of, sell me your sister, basically. I won't hurt her. She has great power, blah, blah, blah. Sell me your sister, and I'll let you live, basically, is what this was. So he does. Nate was held. So he writes Tessa. Nate was held prisoner by DeQuincy until Tessa learned her power, but when she escaped, DeQuincy blames Nate and let the vampires do whatever they wanted to him. But at that point, DeQuincy was like, you're going to die anyway, and just openly talked in front of Nate. So he did hear about the automations and how a soul can be attached to an automation on a full moon, which Jem goes to check, and the full moon is that night. So Nate's able to point out DeQuincy's hideout on a map, so Henry, Charlotte, and the Enclave go to fight DeQuincy and a ton of automations. Will, Jem, Jessamine, Tessa, Nate, they're all still at the Institute when Mr. Mortmain comes and is like the Dark Sisters, both of them, because the one that was still living revived her dead sister. They're making more automations tonight, and if they succeed, the dozens of automations that the Enclave are fighting right now will turn into hundreds. And so Will and Jem leave to go stop the Dark Sisters. However, after they leave, Tessa, Sophie, and Agatha all get attacked by automations. Agatha gets like a dagger to the chest, so she's obviously not alive anymore. Sophie's distraught. She's like, how are they supposed to enter? Only someone with Shadowhunter blood is supposed to be able to enter the gate. And that's when Tessa realizes when her and Jem were attacked and all the automations were surrounding Jem, they got Jem's blood on their hands. So they had Shadowhunter blood on them. They were able to enter. Before Jem and Will leave, though, Jem has a little moment with Tessa, and he kisses her hand. And Tessa looks over at Will. His fist is clenched, but when Jem comes, he's totally fine. So she's like, did I see something? But the moment was kind of cute. Jem and Will make it to the Dark Sister's place. However, instead of two, there's only one. She's carrying the head of her sister. Ugh. And she just starts maniacally laughing, basically, when she hears that DeQuincy is the Magister. Back at the Institute, Mr. Mortmain comes out from the automations and is like, Tessa, you're going to come with me. Nate, thanks for all your help. And Nate is like, no problem, Magister. So Mr. Mortmain is revealed to be the Magister. Nate has been working for him the whole time. And DeQuincy was just an easy pawn because he hated the Shadowhunters, hates the Accords, and it was easy to blame everything on DeQuincy. The automations grab Tessa, but her little Clockwork Angel comes alive and like attacks the automation. And so she's able to like get away from its grasp. Jessamine, unfortunately, is hit with magic. She goes down. Thomas is fighting all these automations with a sword. But basically, it's just Thomas because Jessamine is also down. Not that she's ever super useful. And Tessa and Sophie have no skills in fighting. Back to Will and Jem, they realize that the sister they've been dealing with is actually not a warlock. She's a demon. Her sister is a warlock. They're probably like half sisters or something. But she's a demon, her sister is a warlock, and the boys are able to figure out everything. Will figures it out a little faster just because he always doesn't trust everybody. Mr. Mortmain is actually the Magister, and he tricked them to get Tessa basically unprotected. Nate is bad, and they used Jem's blood to get in. Tessa and Sophie have to leave Thomas alone because they're not useful and they're only a hindrance. So they run through the Institute trying to find cover, but Nate catches up to them. He's like, I'm far faster than I used to be. And he basically has some skills of a downworlder without actually being one. But Nate taunts Tessa and is basically just like, you're not my sister. Something that's not human could never be my sister. And he admits to being the one who killed their aunt, I think Aunt Henrietta. He had sent chocolates as like a present, but Tessa doesn't eat chocolate. She doesn't like chocolate. So only Aunt Henrietta was eating it. And he's like, don't you think it's interesting I would send something that I knew you wouldn't eat? And so it was laced with poison or something, obviously. And Aunt Henrietta died and Tessa was alone. She wanted to be with family and she's still 17, so should be with family. She had to come to London to Nate. He also reveals that mostly everything was the same. He mostly told the truth when he told them his lie of De Quincey being the Magister. He's like, the best lies are rooted in truth. But basically just instead of De Quincey offering Tessa in exchange, it was Mortmain. And he's always known that Mortmain was the Magister, but it was true. Now, once Tessa escaped, Mortmain gave him to De Quincey as punishment. He's about to grab Tessa, but Jessamine comes out of nowhere and knocks him out. So she obviously didn't die when she was hit with magic. Thank goodness. And so Tessa, Jessamine, and Sophie all run to the sanctuary, which is basically, it's another room in the Institute, but it's also not on holy ground. So like vampires can enter and talk to them if they need to. So they run there, lock the doors, and are hiding. Will and Jem are desperate to get back to the Institute and help protect their friends. So Will cuts free one of the horses that were carrying the carriages and rides it. I don't know if there's a saddle on it or not, but rides it back to the Institute without the carriage because he'll be much faster. Jem has to go in the carriage. He found a cat that was going to be used as a sacrifice by the sisters, so he saved the cat. And so he has to go back in the carriage and go slow. But Will knows that he needs to make it back to the Institute as soon as humanly possible. So he goes alone. Mortmain is able to trick his way into the sanctuary. He's able to mimic voices pretty well, even though he's just a normal human. So he mimics Will's voice and is like, let me in. Jessamine, unfortunately, lets him in. And he's able to like manipulate and blackmail his way to be alone with Tessa. He basically just threatens Sophie and Jessamine. Tessa agrees to be alone with him if he'll let the girls live. And that is agreed upon, but the automations do take the girls away. So it's just Mortmain and Tessa. Will makes it to the Institute and sees the gates open, and that's like, he's like, this is so wrong. Like it feels so wrong. He comes in and he sees Thomas. At first he thought Thomas wasn't alive, so he starts to give like, it's sort of like last rites, but for shadow hunters. And after they've already passed, it's like when you fall in battle. And Thomas stops him and is like, not a shadow hunter. And he's like, you fight like one. But he's not a shadow hunter, so no rune will heal him. And he's bleeding out. He dies, unfortunately. And it sucks. We really liked Thomas. I'm so sad. Jem eventually comes later, and he rescues Sophie and Jessamine from the automations with the help of Charlotte and Henry, who finally make it back. They're late to everything. Nate ends up escaping with the Pyrex, something along those lines. It's basically a box that holds demon energies. He escapes with the automation that was holding that. We're back in the sanctuary, and Mortmain reveals that he made Tessa. Not like he's her father, but like his plans were put in motion. And she is what he made her to be. And she threatens to unalive herself if Mortmain doesn't reveal what he means by that. She has a dagger to her heart, and she's like, I'll do it. And so he basically tells her that her mom was unfaithful to her dad, but probably didn't even realize she was, and probably didn't even know what she herself was. She's like, what does that mean? But he's refusing to tell her. I'm not sure what the mom was, but I think the unfaithful to dad but didn't realize it was a demon. Basically took her father's form, and they had slept together, and when she had gotten pregnant, it was actually by a demon instead of her husband, who she thought she had slept with. Mortmain tries to call Tessa's bluff about unaliving herself, so she turns around and falls into the fountain with blood pouring down her shirt. Will comes into the sanctuary not long after, sees Mortmain and Tessa, and is threatening to unalive Mortmain. Unfortunately, he just vanishes, disappears. Doesn't run away and leave, just poof, disappears. He goes to Tessa, and all the walls that he built up are crumbling, and he can't handle it. Tessa's, though, alive. She's like, I tricked him. She changed for just a brief second into another person who had blood pouring down her, the front of her. And so she changed for that brief second. Blood started pouring down, and she turned so Mortmain didn't see her change. And she fell forward, and she's like, I got the idea from you. During one of their conversations about books, she just remembered a heroine who did something kind of similar, and obviously not changing and all that, but she got the idea from Will, and she's like, thank you, you saved me. And he was terrified of the thought of losing Tessa. Shadowhunters then have a funeral for all the Shadowhunters that have passed, and the funeral is not for Thomas and Agatha, unfortunately, but the Institute does grieve them. Tessa's convinced she's going to be asked to leave. While she might not have been the one to cause all these problems were caused because somebody wanted her. But when Charlotte comes back, she asks Tessa to stay. She's like, I want you to stay and be safe. Also, my leadership of the Institute is being called into question, but having strong connections to Downworlders helps me. So if you stay on my side, it'll help me. And so Tessa's really excited that she gets to stay. She goes to Will, super excited, but he's an ass. They have a very sweet moment for half a second, and then he's like, we'll have to do it in your room. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, Jem likes to come into mine sometimes, so we'll have to have fun in your room. And she's like, excuse you? What are you talking about? He's like, what? Isn't that why you came up here really excited? And he's like, and we don't even have to worry about protection because warlocks can't have children. She's like, what? And he's like, oh, you didn't know that? I thought someone told you. And he's just a dick. And Tessa's like, what the hell? I know you put on this act, but I thought we were friends. And so she runs away. Not from the Institute, just from Will. Jem comes and comforts her. They have a sweet moment. He says, I'll always be here for you. We'll all always be here for you. Your family. You're one of us. And yeah. Also, her little Clockwork Angel flies back in. It knocks on the window, and if she opens it up, it flies in and becomes just a normal little charm again. Wild. Finally, we're in the epilogue, which is Magnus. He is at Camille's home. Camille's still not back. She went into hiding after the failed mission at De Quincy's place. Magnus is unsure if she will come back, but he's staying in her place just in case. He misses her. And when he gets notified that a Shadowhunter is there to see him, he goes out, and it's Will, drenched in rain, just looking desperate, and he asks Magnus for help. And that, my friends, is the story of The Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. So comment down below, let me know what you thought of the book. If you liked Jem, if you liked Will, Tessa, if you were surprised by Nate's betrayal, or if you saw that coming, or surprised that De Quincey actually wasn't the Magister and it was Mortmain. If you want to talk about stuff that happens in future books, please just let other people know that you're talking about spoilers. I don't want it to be spoiled for anyone who does not want that. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you all next time. Bye!